Now playing California Triathlon Soup.
Welcome to another edition of California Triathlon Soup. Today we're very lucky to have five-time Ironman world champion Craig Alexander. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation to come on.
Are you now you're Australian, so I assume you're calling from Sydney?
Yep, Sydney. That's where I was born, where I grew up, and of course, when I was racing for 20 years, we would spend a lot of time overseas, but predominantly in Sydney now.
We have a lot to cover today. So about 30 minutes, I think, total. We have a lot to cover. And first and foremost, you have just an amazing history, racing history. You're, again, a five-time Ironman world champion. You probably don't introduce yourself that way. How do you position yourself in terms of your career? Like, what do you say? What do you take away from your career as this is who I am and this is what I did?
Well, most of the time these days, I introduce myself as Neri's husband and Lucy, Austin, and Lani's dad. So that's what I like to be known as. But I mean, what I take away from my career was I got to do something that I was passionate about and that I loved for a quarter of a century. I mean, I raced as a professional athlete for 25 years and I had a lot of good wins, but probably more losses, as is the life of a pro athlete. A lot of great learnings, and yeah, it was something I wouldn't trade. That period of time was, I mean, I talk about it with my wife all the time when we would spend 5 or 6 months of the year in Australia and then five or 6 months overseas. It was a wonderful time in our lives, and we made some great friends, people who we still catch up with when we travel, when we go to Kona or some of the other events. And I mean, life moves on though. You can't be a pro athlete forever. So I think at some point you have to sort of separate your identity from that, although it's something I'm very proud of and something that I did and something that I'll always remember. And but yeah, trying to move into other areas of life. And I guess the life of a pro athlete is, it's very, I wouldn't say selfish, but just there's a lot of self-assessment. You know, is my training on track? How's my recovery? What's my race schedule? And, you know, as a parent, that's sort of the paradox of what needs to happen, because there's other people in your life, your kids, who sort of require that sort of attention. So I think it's natural that you move through into other phases of life. And that's what I am now. I'm sort of moving out of that really intense period where it's just a singular focus. And it was great though. It was an awesome run that I had. And I'm just so thankful of the opportunities that it's presented to me, even now, but at the time and the people I met, it was a great period of time.
Was it, now you started short course as most folks do, and then eventually went long course. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And then the second question I have is, harder thing, getting to the top or staying at the top?
Both great questions. So I guess my journey into the sport, wasn't your typical, I started late. I was 20 or 21 years of age. I was at college studying to be a physical therapist. I played soccer until I was 19 or 20. But I'd always been interested in endurance events or multidiscipline events. Like at the Olympics, I used to love to watch the decathlon. So that race in Hawaii just seemed to have iconic status, and I would watch it on television every year when it was on in October. The Wide Water Sports would do a great show around the event. And of course, in 94, a little Aussie, Greg Walsh, won the race. And so I got huge news back here. And that was sort of my catalyst to get more into the sport. At the time, I was sort of doing what we used to call biathlons. They're now called aquathons, a lot of swim run races. But when Walshy took the title in Kona, I sort of launched more into triathlons. And yeah, like most people, I started with sprint distance and Olympic distance. And there used to be so many events around. Like every weekend there was an event, whether it be a biathlon or an aquathon or sort of a sprint distance triathlon. And from the very first triathlon I ever did, the sport just, I guess I was bitten by the bug. I just loved it. The challenge of it, being outdoors, the way you had to combine the three disciplines. There were so many things that I really loved about those triathlon events, and they were very raw. And in the early days, it was just you against yourself, really, a challenge with 1 or 2 thousand other people. But that really sort of raw challenge of it spoke to me on challenging courses. But yeah, I started in the sprint distance and made my way up. About 2 years into the sport, I did my first half Ironman because I was lucky enough to meet Greg Walsh, actually. And he said to me, some advice he gave me was, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one distance or another. The really good athletes do all the distances. And so I thought, yeah, well, that makes sense. You want to be versatile. So I would jump through all the different distances. And then in 2002, I came to the US for the first time and loved it. I mean, the sport was a little different 20 years ago to what it is now, but there were so many iconic races on the US circuit, St. Croix, St. Anthony's, Chicago. And there were big money races as well back then. You would remember Lifetime Fitness, Minnesota, they had that big prize purse race. And then that ended and High V started. So the triathlon landscape was very rich back then with a lot of opportunities to race over different distances. And so that was my journey into the sport. And then in 2006, I won the half Ironman or the 70.3 World Championships, which qualified me to do Kona the next year in 07.
And that was in Clearwater?
Clearwater. So I won the 70.3 Worlds in Clearwater, the inaugural running of that event. And that qualified me to get to Kona. So after being in the sport for just over a decade, I finally got to the race that I had seen all those years before, and it really had introduced me to the sport of triathlon. And but it was quite a journey to get there. So, and then your second question, is it harder to get to the top or stay? Well, that's a great question, and I always think it's harder to stay there because of a lot of reasons. Your own personal challenges, like a lot of people achieve something that they've worked at for decades. It might be a long-held dream, and once you achieve it, sometimes the motivation can leave the room, so to speak, or you can exhale and breathe out and not operate at that same high level. So I always think it's harder to stay at the top because, and for me, it was just a journey, and part of the journey was winning, was climbing the mountain the first time. But my journey didn't end really when I won that first world title, and it didn't end when I won the second one or even the fifth one. I think it sort of speaks to the kind of personality you have. And my challenge was always a personal one to improve and to be better. And I think that's something that speaks to people of all levels, whether you're trying to win world titles or just do a sprint distance triathlon. It's a personal challenge. And that's what it was for me. I mean, even when I was fortunate enough to be in a position to be winning world titles, I still wanted to be better. I wanted to improve. And that's one of the things I loved about our sport, where there's so many different aspects and elements and factors to it. There's always something you can work on, whatever level you're at. As I said right in the beginning, that was one of the things that really attracted me to the sport, the three disciplines and the way you have to put it together. And it was always a puzzle that you could put together and pull apart and put together again and try and be better. So I just think it's harder to stay at the top because once you're there, you have the motivation. How's your motivation looking? Because you've got a lot of athletes coming through who want what you've got. So you have to match their desire, their work ethic. And I just, athletes tend to lift when you're the reigning world champion and you're in the race. Every race becomes a world title because you're there. You're not just some athlete who has the potential to win a world title. You are now a world champion. And that brings with it certain responsibilities around promotion, but also certain responsibilities within your own preparation, because each time you race, there's some athletes in the field who, and a lot of young guys who want to take your scalp. So you have to be on your game every single time you're on the start line. And I love that challenge, to be honest. I thrived on that. But I think to do something once is amazing. To win a world title once is amazing. To replicate it when you change as a person and as an athlete and the next year you race, you're a year older. When your competition changes and when the environment that you race in changes, I think it's challenging to stay there.
Have you, you've obviously had some great races. Have you ever had the perfect race? And if not, what was the closest perfect race you've had? Because I'll say this, I've never had a perfect race. It could be preparation, it could be race day. You know, you look back and you're like, it wasn't perfect. I'm guessing you maybe you had something pretty close to perfect, but have you had a perfect race, or what was that race for you?
I think we have this, each athlete, all of us, we have this idea in our head of what the perfect race looks like. And I've had some very good races, no doubt, but I don't think I've ever had the perfect race. And that was part of the challenge. I wanted to sort of progress from whatever level I was at a certain point in my career to that picture I had in my head of what I could be as an athlete, physically and mentally. So, you know, in a race that takes 8 hours, like an Ironman, it's hard to have every second perfect. So, you know, even my third victory in Hawaii, when I took the course record there, I mean, I cramped at the end of that race and had to walk a little bit. And so just looking at that, you can say, well, that wasn't perfect then because you left a little bit of time out there, but it was a great race, but it wasn't perfect. And I think the closest thing I ever got was a race I mentioned before. It was the Lifetime Fitness Triathlon in Minnesota, which at the time was the highest prize purse in the history of our sport. And just by the fact it had so much prize money, it attracted such a world-class field. You know, it was an invitation-only race. You had to submit a resume to get invited, and you pretty much had to have an Olympic medal or a world championship medal to get in. And I had in 2005, and then also add to that, it was a unique format that it was billed as the Battle of the Sexes. So they'd invite 20 males, 20 females. They'd look at every Olympic distance race for 12 months and what the average time was between the male winner and the female winner and what the spread was between the top 10s. And this particular race in Minnesota, they came up with what they called the equalizer, which was a time handicap where they would send the ladies off and the men would have to stand on the beach as a big clock counted down. And then at whatever the predetermined handicap was, they'd send the boys off to chase the girls. And first across the line got the big prize money. So it wasn't only you had to beat your own gender, you had to actually, it was a race that was billed as Battle of the Sexes. So it was kind of an interesting and unique race. I never really did anything else like that throughout my career, where you'd have to try and beat the boys, but then you'd also have to try and catch the girls. And in 2005, I was able to win the race outright. I finally beat all the boys there. I'd had some good races, but that was the first time I crossed the line as the first male, but I also caught all the ladies. So
who were some of the ladies in that race? If you remember?
Emma Snowsill, Barb Lindquist, I think Sheila Tormina, Annabelle Luxford, McKeely Jones. It was a who's who. And Emma Snowsill, who of course, went on to win an Olympic gold medal in Beijing in triathlon 3 years later. I caught her at about 7 or 7.5 kilometers into the run. So at that point, I went into the lead overall. And I look back and think that was pretty much close to the best race I ever had. I mean, I still made some little mistakes here and there in that race, but I feel like when I remember that race, certainly my own recollection of it anyway, is that every moment I was just in the zone and feeling great and pushing hard and making predominantly smart decisions. So I think that was probably the closest race I had to what you would call perfect. I mean, the men's field is incredible. I crossed the line first for the boys. Second was Simon Whitfield, who was triathlon's first Olympic gold medalist in Sydney. Hamish Carter was there in the top 5. He'd won the Olympics in Athens 8 months before that race, or 9 months before. Bevan Doherty, who'd finished second in Athens the year before he was in the race. Greg Bennett, who finished 4th in Athens and was a great Olympic distance triathlete over drafting and non-drafting events. So yeah, it was really an incredible, it was a collection of the best athletes. So my memory of that race is always, it ranks very high. It ranks very high in my favorite events and races where I feel like I performed at or close to my potential.
Lifetime we're huge fans of Lifetime Tri and the series. I think they're actually shrinking down their footprint to just be Chicago and New York moving forward, which is sad because they've done such a good job of having races in Austin and Arizona, and they had one in Oceanside in California and Miami, and so we have to figure out ways to their brand is fantastic. We have to figure out ways to get more of their races. In terms of a couple things, in terms of on the business side, PTO was something that wasn't around when you were racing. What are your thoughts?
I like the idea. In principle, I love it. I mean, as you mentioned, there's been a few false starts over the years. There's been different athlete associations or organizations that have formed. Typically when people hear the word athletes union, they hear the word union, and that tends to make race directors shiver. But, I like the idea of what the PTO are doing, and they'll be the first to say to all their members that, yes, it's about us growing the sport and wanting more as a professional body, but to get more, we have to deliver more. We have to grow the sport. The onus and the responsibility falls firstly and foremostly with us. And I love that they're not sort of shirking their responsibilities. They're being accountable and saying, we're trying to grow the sport. Of course, we want to be a piece of the pie, but we have to make a bigger pie. Once we make a bigger pie, then everybody, can profit from that, from the professionals through to the amateurs and then grassroots, the juniors. And, I've been in the sport a long time, and the sport is at its healthiest when all levels of the sport are doing well. When we're bringing in a lot of people, participation is growing and in thriving. When we're bringing in a lot of talented juniors, so the grassroots and not even just talented juniors, just making the sport available and accessible to kids who want to do it for fun. And obviously the professional side of the sport as well. So, I like that that's their mindset, and their mantra is to just grow the sport for everybody. And from what I've seen, they're doing a great job. They're trying to, and there's no secret they're sort of replicating what other successful associations like the ATP in tennis or the PGA in golf. And in fact, the PTO have actually brought in people who have been involved with those two organizations to help. And I've seen, I just think it's heading in the right direction. They're just trying to put on events. They're trying to make the sport more accessible to everybody, but also capture it and sell it to a wider audience to hopefully bring people in and to bring corporate dollars into the sport as well, which tend to come in when there's good television coverage. So, and I lent my name to them in the beginning to be one of the captains for the Collins Cup, which is a Ryder Cup style competition, teams-based competition where we're going to have an international team, a team from North America and a European team. And I like the idea of it. I like the concept. I think it's just something that could be interesting and could capture the imagination and attention and maybe bring some more people into the sport. It could be an access point for people to see the sport for the first time. And if it's packaged up right and done correctly, which I think it will be. And obviously due to the pandemic, it was meant to be the inaugural running of the Collins Cup last year in May. We didn't get to do it, but hopefully this year or at some point. But I just like the idea of they're just thinking outside the box and trying to bring in some things that have worked really well in other sports to our sport. And of course, our sport's unique for a lot of reasons. So I don't think you can quite model it on golf or tennis, but surely we can learn the lessons of what's worked well there. And in the end, I just love the sport. So I want to see the sport thrive. I want to see participation numbers very high. I want to see a lot of people having access to a sport that you and I know and love. It's a great sport, and the more people who have access to it, the better. So, but I have liked what the PTO have done. And, I think a lot of people, a lot of cynics, and we've all been around a long time. You've seen these things come and go. A lot of people have said it wouldn't last, but I have really loved what they've done. It's been a sustained campaign to grow the sport, to grow the profile of the athletes, to put on events such as they did with Challenge Daytona and what they're trying to do with the Collins Cup, and to partner up with organizations that are already in existence just to grow the sport and grow the pie. So I've been a big fan.
Good, good. We wanted to utilize your experience as a coach, not only an athlete, but as a coach. And one of the things that a lot of our new athletes, and I guess all of us, struggle with is running off the bike. And so I want to give you as much time as you'll share with us on that. And the two questions that I have running off the bike are, one of the data points is if you go back and look at Alistair Brownlee as a 10K, I think he can do a 28 and change as a 10K, which now I guess is a new 10K record in the 26. So he's really slow. And then as an impacted, so as the bike run, I think he's in the 29 range. So it was only very small impact. Two questions. How often do you practice it? And what is what is a good ratio? How do you know you're working the bike not too hard? Like, how do you know that?
They're both good questions. So I'll address the whole thing because I've got 3 or 4 take-home points, and it covers both your questions. So the goal is to get to a position exactly where Alistair is, that you mentioned, where an athlete, and whatever level athlete you are, that your fresh 10K or 5K or 21K is very close to what you can run off the bike. That's the goal. I think we'd all accept that. Obviously, when you have to swim and bike before running, you're going to be a little fatigued. But in a perfect world, what we're aiming to do as athletes is get that run off the bike time very close to our fresh time, like you mentioned Alistair had done. So there are a few things, and it's one of the most challenging, I think, things in triathlon is running off the bike. I know certainly when I started in the sport, I came in having played soccer for 15 years. So I was quite a good runner, even though it's different training. But of the 3 disciplines, running was the one that I was the most accomplished at when I started in triathlon. And as I mentioned to you, when I started, I was at college. I was studying to be a physiotherapist. So the first thing I did when I started triathlons was join the Sydney Uni running club, track club. And I'd go down and do a lot of running with them. And my times on the track when I do road races were quite good, but I couldn't get anywhere near it when I would run off the bike. And it was very frustrating. And I think that's a frustration that a lot of triathletes share, especially when you're new to the sport. So I guess my blueprint is this. Firstly, there's a couple of things you need to understand, that as you progress as a triathlete, your running off the bike will slowly improve anyway, because as you get fitter in all 3 disciplines, there's going to be a general improvement across all 3. So that's the first thing. And that's implied, I think, as you accumulate months and years in the sport, you're going to get better. Also, as your cycling improves, your running off the bike will improve. So when you get off the bike not as fatigued, you're going to run better. But there are certainly some things you can do to accelerate it. And that's to the points that you made. So, some things that I used to incorporate and I recommend to athletes that I work with is you got to bring in strength training, run strength training. That's the first thing. And that's hills. So that can be as simple as just going on a course near your house, a run that's just a hilly route you go on. And it doesn't even have to be hard running over the hills. Even just easy aerobic running over the hills will build specific run strength. So you can either do that or you can do specific hill repeats. So find a hill near where you live and just go up and down it. Go up it hard, recover down, up it hard, and always with good technique. But so the first thing that I did and that I suggest is to incorporate specific run strength training into my weekly routine. So that's once a week I would do that. I would do hill running. I would also incorporate strength training in the gym. A lot of people are pressed for time. So if you have a gym at your work, or you can even set up a basic gym at home, there's a lot of exercises, strength exercises in the gym where the strength gains transfer very well to running and cycling and swimming for that matter. So, you'll hear people talk about the transfer of training effect. That is doing things in training where you reap the rewards on race day. And there's a specificity that's required. You're going to improve doing something in a race if you do it and mimic it in training. So get in the gym. So the first thing is to run hills once a week. Second thing is get in the gym once or twice a week if you can, especially if you're pressed for time. And really work on those exercises. And to give you examples, there's inclined leg press, squats, and also more explosive exercises like lunges, box jumps. And there's actually more than 100. There's probably thousands of them. If you Google, strength training exercises for running or cycling, you'll get them. So that's what I would suggest. The first point is you need to incorporate specific strength training exercises for running into your weekly routine. The second thing is functional mobility. When you're in that cycling position, particularly that time trial position, if you're down, your body's in a unique position where you're lengthening the posterior muscles. They call them the posterior chain muscles, and also closing off the front muscles. So like your hip flexors, for instance. So you're putting your glutes, which are a running prime mover, in a lengthened position, and you're putting your hip flexors in a closed off position. So the second thing you really need to work on is that functional mobility of the muscles around your core. So you need to incorporate, and it sort of ties into what the first point was, which was get in the gym. When you're in there, don't only do pure strength exercises, do core stability and strength exercises as well, and do exercises that open up and strengthen all the muscles around your hip. And there's some of the same exercises. So there's crossover here. So some of the functional mobility exercises so that you can hop straight off the bike and run well immediately are things like lunges and squats. So it's just taking muscles through range under load. And it's important to do that because if you think of being on the bike and then jumping off and running, the reason it feels funny, and everybody feels that sensation when you first hop off the bike, is because you've been in that position on the bike and now you're trying to stand up straight and also take your hip through extension, which it hasn't been now for a while. So as neuromuscularly, there's challenges of the muscles have to fire differently. And the good news is, you can practice that changeover. So, and also the blood is all in, we're delivering oxygen to the muscles that work the hardest. And when we're cycling, the muscles that are working the hardest predominantly are the quads. When we run, that's more hamstrings and glutes. So you have to teach your body to get the blood quickly, and they call it blood shunting, to the muscles that need it most now. So that ties into what I just talked about, doing specific exercises, but it also speaks to my third point, which is the brick session, which needs to be a staple of every triathlete's program, running off the bike. Running off the bike is a skill that, like all skills, improves with practice. So you need to incorporate at least once a week and the two that I used to love to do, the 2 runs off the bike that I would incorporate into my weekly routine, where I would do a long ride, I would finish and I'd roll into my garage and I'd just pull on the running shoes and then run around the block a few times. So it could be a 5 or 10 minute jog, just to sort of teach my body that changeover that I just talked about, to prepare your body for, this is what happens next. When we ride and then we run, this is how the body feels, and to try and promote those changes to happen more quickly, which happens, as I said, it's a practice response. So when you practice running off the bike, your body gets very proficient at starting to shunt the blood from the quadriceps now to the hamstrings and the glutes, and also the muscle firing patterns change quicker. So you always get that sort of awkward, it's kind of like having sea legs that you imagine a sailor would have when you hop off a boat and you just don't have your land legs. That's what it feels like when you hop off the bike. You have just a sort of a lack of coordination and that funny sensation, but we combat that by doing.
How long should that last?
Well, it can last, it varies. The more you practice, the quicker the changeover happens. But I mean, even towards the end of my career in races like Kona, I'd always have it for a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. And it's just a physiological response. The more you practice it, your body gets very adept at cycling and sending messages from your brain to your legs that we're cycling, and now we're running. And that changeover can happen quickly, as does where you send the blood and the oxygen to the work. That changeover happens quickly. But there's also that sort of physiological thing that when you've swum and then you've biked, they're non-weight bearing exercises, and then you run. So now you're weight bearing and you're upright, and so your blood pressure drops. So you get that sort of dizzy feeling as well. And it just takes a while, and to combat that, your heart rate spikes. So there's always that, even when you've practiced it, but it's not as severe and not as pronounced when you're more experienced at running off the bike. And that comes with more racing, but also, as I said, incorporating it into your regular training routine. So you'll always get that feeling, but like all things, especially mentally, when you've felt it before and you know you've trained to combat it, you're not as anxious about it. You feel it and you just get on with it. And yeah, those changes can happen. And like I say, the specificity of training and transfer of training is very good, because it means you can, for anyone listening, even if you're new to the sport, if you incorporate some of these things I'm talking about, you'll feel differences within 3 to 4 weeks, even earlier. The more you practice it, the more comfortable you get with it mentally, but also physiologically, your body makes those changes quite quickly and makes the adaptations. So the brick session is very important. The next point is pacing on the bike. Yes, you can't overbike, and we all love to do it. We all love to get in the race, and we've tapered, we feel fresh, where the atmosphere is amazing, family and friends are looking on, you're racing, and we can overbike. But in this day and age, there's no reason to do that, because we have all the technology that allows us to pace ourselves well, whether it be heart rate monitors or power meters on the bike. So, every athlete knows the level that they have trained to when they've done their interval work and their race pace brick sessions, or even just their race pace intervals. They know the heart rates and the powers that they see. So you don't miraculously turn up on race day and perform way above that. You have to stick to the parameters that you've trained to. So that's a discipline, but it's important. I know that towards the end of my career, I got very good at, just with experience, particularly races like Hawaii. It's a world championship, but you often have to let guys like Chris Lieto or Norman Stadler ride away. They're great cyclists. And I would try and stick to my numbers as much as I try to find a balance between going with the feel of the race and my own subjective feel and the dynamics of the race, but also using the technology that I had available to me, which was a power meter. And it would sometimes feel easy on the bike. And I thought I should be pushing harder, but I know I have a marathon to run. So it's finding that balance of going with the dynamic of the race, but also listening to the messages that your body's giving you. And then the third piece of that is looking at the data that you've got. And it might be heart rate or power. So you need to pace yourself on the bike so that you can jump off and access your full run fitness and full run potential, because ultimately a triathlon is a swim, a bike, and a run. And we've only got a certain amount of energy to use in all 3 disciplines. So you have to use it wisely. So that would be the next suggestion, pace yourself. And then the last point is fueling. You need to, in the longer the race goes, obviously the longer we're out there. So the more fuel we have to put into our body, and the more we have to be mindful of hydration and dehydration. Dehydration in particular can lead to a very quick drop off in performance. So you need to fuel yourself. You need to know how much fluid you need to replace per hour, how much electrolyte you need to replace per hour, and how many calories you need to put in per hour. They're the 3 things of race nutrition and training nutrition: fluid, electrolyte, calories. And that starts early in the race, usually 10 to 15 minutes after getting on the bike. You start with your fueling strategy. So that's the next piece. So in summary, the more that you're in the sport and the more training you do, you'll get a natural progression with your running off the bike. But to accelerate it, do these 5 things. Incorporate strength running or strength training into your running each week, and that's hills and gym work. Work on functional mobility, number 2. That comes with the gym work. Number 3 is a regular brick session into your routine. And that could be a run off a long ride, or it could be a more specific, you do a ride on the bike trainer with race pace efforts, and then you jump off and run straight on a treadmill. So brick sessions come in many forms. And I used to do them all. I used to do, like I said, a short run off a long ride, or I would do a hard run off a hard ride as well. So brick sessions is number 3. Point number 3, incorporate those regularly. Point number 4 is learn to pace yourself and learn the numbers that you need to see, but also that subjective feeling when you do your race pace efforts on the bike and the run. And point number 5 is nutrition. You need to fuel yourself in training. And the little tie in, the caveat there is the best place to practice your nutrition, and specifically your race nutrition, is in a race. In training, the best place to do it is on the brick session, because that's the one session of the week where you actually put the disciplines together and it most closely simulates the race. So that's where you can really make some good changes to your race nutrition and lay down a good strategy.
Craig, where were you 12 years ago when, where were you? That's all I want to say. That's all those things are fantastic. I have one last question. It's kind of a bonus question, and you know, you may or may not be a good answer to it. We had somebody this week who travels all the time and unfortunately just doesn't have access to a bike, or the bike they would, but they want to practice bricks. So what rough simulation could they do in order to fatigue their legs? What workouts could they do in order to fatigue their legs before they go on a run? And if we can't answer that today, maybe you could think on it and we could send it out next week.
Yeah, no, I think there's a few, like if they're traveling a lot, hopefully they have access to a gym in the hotel. And most hotel gyms have bikes and treadmills. So I would just be doing little 10 minutes or 8 minutes steady to firm on the bike, jump off 5 minutes on the treadmill, or you could even lengthen those things out. Bricks come in a lot of shapes and sizes, but the premise again is teaching your body to go from one action or activity to another. So if there's a spin bike, or if you can Google there's a gym nearby, they often have really good spin bikes that are similar to the bikes that we ride in races. You just need to teach your body to make that change over from cycling to running quickly. And as I said, there's physiological and neuromuscular adaptations that occur the more you practice it. So I would find a gym, or try and, when you're traveling, source, when you're booking your hotel, maybe looking into, if there's a few hotels to choose from, looking at one that's got a gym, and all you need is an upright bike and a treadmill. If you can't get a bike, there are some exercises you can do, like box jumps or lunges. Do sets of box jumps and lunges. So go to a local park, do some box jumps up onto a park bench and a set of lunges, and then go into a run. So you can pre-fatigue the legs there and then go into a run. It's not quite the same because, as I mentioned, that specificity of training and transfer of training, we want to replicate as closely as possible the activity we're trying to prepare for. But to your point, it's not every day we're in a perfect environment to train, so you have to make do. So I would do those two specific activities. I'd do box jumps, a few sets of box jumps and a few sets of lunges, and then go into a run, because I think that will pre-fatigue the legs.
I have a gentleman who's doing a race May, his first race in May, doesn't have a bicycle yet. We'll have one by May, but he wants to do brick training. And I'm like, well, we need to, again, get through this. So I'll recommend to him that box jumps for sure. Box
jumps, any sort of those exercises in the gym, to incline leg press. And I just think any activities that fatigue the legs as closely to cycling as possible, and then you jump off and run, you're going to start stimulating those changes that you need. So yeah, I would suggest those activities, and to all those things I mentioned. I know I went through quite a lot. I tried to compress it with the running off the bike. I actually wrote an ebook on this very topic for TriathlonWire. So any of your listeners who are looking there, I think it's a free ebook that you can download. And TriathlonWire has a lot of great resources for people getting into the sport, because there are certain things and certain, I wouldn't say shortcuts, but just things, if you know, it's going to really help you on your journey, particularly when you're starting out. Because as you and I both know, you can flounder around and make a lot of mistakes, but if there's resources that you can tap into to help you with your training and be more specific, it just makes the whole journey more enjoyable.
TriathlonWire is one of those things I look forward to getting in my inbox every week, and I think they've got a really large list of subscribers now in a really short time. So good on them.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say, on behalf of the good folks from California Triathlon Soup, we are honored to have you on here. We didn't know, being you were Australian, we didn't know if we'd have to do subtitles or not, but as it turns out, it worked out great. And obviously, just giving you a hard time. Is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with, or any good wishes for 2021, other than I hope we all get to race?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously for those of us who love the sport, last year was pretty tough, but the great thing about triathlon is it's a personal journey and there's always things you can work on, even when you're in lockdown. So set up a little home gym, running something that I really did quite a bit of during the lockdown when we couldn't get into pools. And but yeah, hopefully things will bounce. I always like to think positively. So I would just like to wish all the listeners well with whatever their goals and ambitions are for the coming year. It's such a great sport and it challenges you not only physically but mentally as well. So hopefully I get to see some of your listeners at the races come up and say hi if you see me and if you've listened to this little podcast. But just good luck with your journey and enjoy the sport like we do. It's a great sport. It's a sport for life, triathlon, and it's been a wonderful companion in my life, and I just hope everybody gets to experience how great a sport it is. So yeah, just get involved, train hard and train smart and enjoy the races.
This has been California Triathlon Soup with our guest, 5-time world champion, Craig Alexander. Thank you again, Craig.